You can find links to all our guests' books on the products page at creativityfound.co.uk. Just visit creativityfound.co.uk/products and books.
Only people who were rich had time for those sorts of pastimes. It wasn't really for people like us working class. If you have somebody, as in all things, to guide you through, it's much quicker and you learn an awful lot just by having somebody who's done it before. Because, I've never done this before. I had no idea what to expect. So I think for me, I learned a lot, which is what I wanted from this experience. This really makes you realize that you can change your life, and it's full of surprises and it's really exciting. It really is. Since I've written the book, I've continued to grow and change and look for more challenges. And even if you just write your story down for that reason, that is superb because you benefit as an individual so much.
Hi, I'm Claire, founder of Creativity Found, a community for creative learners and educators, connecting adults who want to find a creative outlet with the artists and crafters who can help them do so, with workshops, courses, online events and kits. For this podcast, I chat with people who have found or refound their creativity as adults. We'll explore their childhood experiences of the arts, discuss how they came to the artistic practices they now love, and consider the barriers they may have experienced between the two. We'll also explore what it is that people value and gain from their newfound artistic pursuits, and how their creative lives enrich their practical, necessary, everyday lives. For this episode, I'm speaking with Jill Phillips, who recorded her family's stories of working class life in post-World War II London and wove them together into a book. Writing Lamlash Street has changed Jill's life in many ways, as we're about to find out. Hi Jill, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Brilliant. Can you start by telling us how you have been expressing yourself creatively recently?
I've been thinking about what my next book's going to be, which is always after you've written one book, it's like, okay, what are you going to do next? So I can't decide really quite whether to go with a sequel to the first book or whether I should go with something completely different, because not only do I talk about my book, I also talk about motivation and doing anything you want to. And even if you want to start running 5Ks and you're in your 60s, you can go and do that, but you just have to do it slightly differently. So I'm really passionate about people doing whatever their dreams are. And I'm also into more practical things in my life right now. Things ebb and flow with creativity. Sometimes you have lots of time for it, and other times you're into the more day-to-day stuff. That's where I am creatively right now.
Yeah, that's really interesting, kind of enveloping the main two elements of Creativity Found, doing something creative, but also doing something new, no matter what your age, and having the confidence to try something new later in life, whatever that may mean. So that's really good that you have that outlook. Did you have a creative childhood?
No, nothing at all. Mum was very goal focused. My grandfather, he died when I was 1 year old. I didn't really know him, but he certainly influenced my mother. And he was a regimental sergeant major, a drill sergeant. So Mum was very task orientated. She had no time for things like sitting and drawing or painting or writing or poetry, none of that. It was all very goal focused. And I think I can understand it. Having thought about her life so much when I was writing the book, I think I can understand it now, because they basically had to get food on the table. If you didn't have money coming in, and money was really week to week, if they didn't have savings, nobody had savings in those days, not where I lived anyway. You really were just trying to make ends meet. If you paid rent, you had to make sure the rent was paid and you had money for groceries. And so everything was very focused around bringing money into the house, so very, very practical. So no, we had no history in anybody in any part of our family who were creative, because the way I was raised and understood life to be in those days was that only people who were rich had time for those sorts of pastimes. It wasn't really for people like us working class. We were there just trying to keep body and soul together and make sure the kids got enough food to go to school and clothing and that sort of thing. So no, absolutely nothing at all.
That's amazing. Only people who were rich could afford to
Oh
have
yeah,
the time and pleasure to do things creatively.
yeah.
Oh, so what was life like at school, growing up generally? What were your aims when you were growing up?
Well, to be honest, at the time that my book was written, which around the age of 10, it was just to try and get my homework done and keep away from mum if she had something else for me to do. So I was really avoiding things as much as I could. Although even at that age, it was interesting. When you write down your family stories, you get a chance to talk to your family at a different level. Yes, they tell you the stories, but then I say, well, Mum, so where do you think I got this? Because when I wrote the book, she read it just before she died. She read it, which was lovely that she'd read it before she went. But it's like, so where do you think I got this being different type thing? Which in my family, if you've written things like written a book, you're different somehow. You're not doing the day-to-day stuff. I said, well, you were always a bit different. She said, we had Cockney rhyming slang and going up the apples and pears and the trouble and strife for the wife and all this sort of thing. She said, you did it, she said, but you also at the same time didn't do it because you used proper English a lot more than we did. And I wasn't aware of that until I started to talk to mum. And mum was in her 90s. So mum was, sort of reminiscing and that sort of thing, which was quite handy for me when I was getting the stories together. So yeah, she said, you're always a little bit different from other people. And so I was like, oh, all right, then I hadn't realized that. So my need to write just came innately. It's just in me. I find writing helps me focus on what's important, helps me understand what's around me. And sometimes I just have to write. I don't know anybody in my family except my daughter, which is really interesting because my daughter's very creative. She wrote poetry when she was like 17, 18 years old, which I think is amazing poetry, but she says it's just average. But I'm the mum, you see, so that's probably part of it. But she also does things like Dungeons and Dragons, which is where you have somebody who guides the storyline and people it's like playing games online, but you're actually doing it face to face. Well, she creates amazing storylines through that and characters, and they have accents. So that type of thing, which did not exist in my family, it seems to be something that she's going to carry on with. I have no idea where my need to write came from, other than the fact that academically I was always quite good. So I did a lot of writing anyway, just, like with homework. And I wrote a thesis when I did my master's degree in my late 50s, which people told me was an utter waste of time, but I really enjoyed it. And it's led to writing the book. So that was amazing. So yeah, I think it's just something in me. And I just had the opportunity at some point to address that.
Yeah, brilliant. So you've mentioned that you were academic and that you did a master's, but you did also do an undergraduate degree. When did you get the chance to do that and what were you doing it in?
Well, I did it in occupational therapy. I left school, took my A-levels, and there was a lot of family upset going on at the time. And so I failed my A-levels. And so mum said, well, let's get you out to work at least, you fall back on the old, or we get you out to work, bring money in sort of thing. And I did that for a year, and I was doing a clerical job. This is prior to computers. I can remember I had to put these filing cards into alphabetical order and answer the phones. I was never so bored in my whole life. I thought school was far more interesting than this because at least I was learning something new. So after a year of that, I thought, I'm going to go do something else. I can't stand this. So then I started doing, it's what in the day they called a legal executive course, or paralegals are also called now. So I did that for 2 years. I thought, no, because I wanted to travel a lot. And then it so happened that my friend came over from Canada, where she was living with her parents, to start her speech language pathology course. So we lived in Swiss Cottage. She had an apartment there. And when she was doing that, I started thinking about healthcare, and I got into occupational therapy. Then I went back to school to get my grades up. And so I started occupational therapy. So I was 26 when I started that, which was considered a mature student in the day. Yeah, and after 3 years, I eventually, through one thing or another, I emigrated to Canada.
Okay, yeah, because you've mentioned that you're in Canada now, which is why it's a bit earlier for you. Because when we made the meeting and when we met previously, you were back in the UK and you're visiting your daughter in Canada now. So I'm very sorry for having to go.
No, it's fine. You know what? I mean, I have no idea. I mean, people say to me about time zones. And I said, I have no idea. I've lived with so many different time zones. So there's 5 time zones in Canada. So you're used to chopping and changing times anyway. And then between the UK and Canada, when I was even phoning mum, I had to think, what time is it there? It's fine. I mean, I can be up any time of day or night right now. It doesn't matter.
So why did you choose Canada? And why did you settle in Canada?
As I said, I had a friend in Canada, a school friend, and I came over to visit, and I met my to-be husband on a blind date after about my 3rd visit to Canada. And I finished training, and I thought, well, you know what? Why don't I go over to Canada? I can. So I got my license approved in Canada, and I moved over to St. John's, Newfoundland, which is on the east coast of Canada. And I was in healthcare for 30 years. I was an occupational therapist for about 4 or 5 years, and I was a manager, and then I was an organisational change manager for my last 3 years in an IT setting within healthcare. Yeah, it's been great. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I like stimulation. I like to do things different. I like to experience different things. So, and always have my whole life.
Yeah. So how did the writing come into things? You've mentioned that it's a book about family history, the first book that you've written, because you've mentioned you might be doing another one. How did that all come about, and why and when?
It was a series of events, really. I guess being not in the country at the time, I'm living back in the UK now, but not being in the country at the time, you tend to sort of think and reminisce. And I'd retired, so I had a lot of time on my hands, and I was a little bored, really. I hadn't really planned my retirement that terribly well. And then the other thing that was happening, the only time I was visiting the UK was because some other poor relative had passed away, and I thought, oh, this is terrible, And I realised as I was chatting to my uncle, actually, and 3 months later, when I was in the UK, 3 months later, he'd passed on. And I thought, wow, that's somebody else. And I realised all those stories because every time you meet your aunts and uncles, they talk about the old days and the weddings and the other relatives. And, you reminisce, basically, you're reminiscing. And I thought, well, there's going to be nobody left to reminisce with. And then in addition to that, my father about 5 years ago was having memory problems, and in the end he died of Alzheimer's. And I thought, maybe I'm going to get to the point where I won't remember anything. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just write the stories down. I didn't have any ideas of writing a book. That was too grandiose, like other people did that. Our family didn't do that sort of thing. But I guess the other thing is that Clara, my daughter, was into writing and characters and that sort of thing. So because of that, because she had this interest and drive to write and this need to write things down, I thought, well, maybe I need to start thinking about this. So I started to put a few stories together about when I was younger and going swimming. That was a really cute one. There was a school swimming program, so we used to walk 20 minutes to the swimming baths. It was Manor Place, which is down by the Elephant and Castle. And the way we learned to swim was there were no flotation devices, so you could sink at any time. And the way we learned to swim was the swim instructor, who never got in the water. She never ever got her feet wet. She had clothes on, shoes, the whole bit. She'd walk down by the side of the swimming pool, and she would hold a broom handle in front of you by about 6 inches. And as you were swimming along, if she thought you were sinking, she'd bring the broom handle closer so you could hold on to it so you didn't drown. And she thought you were doing fine, she'd keep it further away, so you kept reaching for it. And about half of us learned how to swim that way. There was no swimming technique, nothing. So those sort of cute little stories, I thought, because I was talking to Clara about it, it's like, well, she couldn't believe how different it was. I thought, well, we're going to lose all that. We're going to lose all those different ways things were. And I thought it was important for me anyway that people these days do say, oh, well, we've got all these problems today. And we do. And life is difficult. But life was difficult in different ways back in the day. So I wanted those stories to be captured, I guess, which is where it started. I had no idea about writing a book. I just wanted the stories written down, which is where I started with it.
Yeah, which I think happens quite a lot. People want to keep those stories alive. Creativityfound.co.uk is the place to go to find workshops, courses, supplies, kits and books to help you get creative. So if you're looking for your own Creativity Found experience, go have a browse to see what's on offer so far. And if you can help adults to find their new creative passion, please get in touch on social media or through the contact details on the website. You're writing the stories down, and how does that become a book?
Well, I had all these stories, and I only had about half the ones I ended up with, but I was getting there. And then it was, like I said, when I visited Uncle, he said, I'd like to write a book about my war exploits. That's what my uncle said, because he was in World War II crossing the Atlantic crossings. He was in the Merchant Navy. So he saw a lot of action during the war, and he was only at 17 and 18. And then poor uncle died. He was one of my favourite uncles. And I thought, but it would be so nice if some of those stories were actually written down. And then I thought, well, I've got family stories as well. And then luckily for us, myself and my brother, my uncle left his flat to us when he passed on. So we had a small inheritance from that. And I thought, I should at least take a percentage of that and get some help so I can turn these stories into a book. So I got a book writing coach because I had not a sweet clue where to start. And I read up on the internet, as you would, and they said, look, yes, you can do it by yourself. No, you don't need any help. But if you have somebody, as in all things, to guide you through, it's much quicker and you learn an awful lot just by having somebody who's done it before. You don't make all those mistakes and go down all those dark alleyways and have to come back up again. And I thought, well, I'm not getting any younger. I really don't want to waste time. And so that's what I did. For me, that was the right way to go, because I had no literary background other than having written a thesis, which isn't literary, it's just facts, really. And I had nobody in the family or friends that I knew that were doing that type of thing, anything other than Clara. And that's what I did. And for me, it worked out really well, because I can still remember the one thing he said to me. He said two things, really. First one he said was, you have to have romance in the book. I thought, you're joking, romance, me? And he said, where would the Titanic be? The movie The Titanic, if there wasn't for the romance. He said, the ship was the setting, and you got to see all of the ship because you were following the romance story all the way through the movie. And I thought that is so true. So he said, you have to have some romance in it to help tie the stories together. So he said to me, so is there any romance, or can you make something up? I thought, I'm not a writer, I'm just putting these stories together. And I said, well, I did have a boyfriend at the time. So that's it, he said. You can write all about your boyfriend. What was his name? His name was Anthony. I thought, oh, okay. So I'm sitting there with my glass of wine some days thinking, how on earth am I going to write about romance? Anyways, it's in there. Luckily I was 10 years old, so it wasn't that complex in terms of romance. So that was good. And the other thing was, he said about, think of your favourite event of the year. And it was a year that I decided to write, from 1962 to 1963. I said, well, Christmas is my absolute favourite time. So that's why the last chapter in the book is about Christmas. He said, well, I think you should bookend it. I said, what do you mean bookend it? He said, start with Christmas of one year and then do a comparison of what it's like Christmas of the second year. And I thought, that's a brilliant idea. So I did those two things, and that really helped me get some structure and some pace to the book as well. Because, I've never done this before. I had no idea what to expect. So I think for me, I learned a lot, which is what I wanted from this experience. So that's how I approached it.
Yeah, I think that's very wise. You can get a lot of help and advice and actual support when you ask other people for that help, and they will see things differently as they're seeing you or what you're doing from the outside, and they may see things that you don't see while you're in the midst of whatever it is you're looking for support for. So that's a very good thing to do. So you've got this you've got the structure and you've got the advice, and you've melding these stories together in a way that they're not disparate now. Did you find a natural writing voice?
I did. And that was a huge surprise to me, because I didn't think I would. But by the time I'd finished the book, there was a definite tone for this 10-year-old voice. It was very practical, somebody who was observing what was going on around her. Most of the time she understood what was going on because things were fairly logical, except for where the romance piece came in, and the friendship romance, which was something she really didn't understand, but she knew it was something nice, but she didn't quite understand why it was nice. And that was really the tone for the whole book. It was an interesting personal experience because I realised that was how I viewed life when I was that age, and I hadn't realised that before. And then when, like I said earlier, when Mum said to me that, yes, I spoke, for the Cockney rhyming slang, but I also had a wider vocabulary than the rest of my family, put it that way. So that sort of tied in the loose ends of me feeling something. I was a little different, but I didn't quite know how. And then when I wrote the book, I began to see myself through the eyes of me as a 10-year-old. And it sort of tied in with what Mum had said, that yes, I was more of an observer. Everyone else was getting into the day-to-day stuff. And yeah, I did that as well. But I tended to sit back and analyse a lot more and observe and try to piece the puzzle together and see patterns of behaviour and understand how this would work and that would work, except in the area of the romance, which completely went against anything I really understood. And to be honest, all the way through my life, that's pretty much been the case as well. So, yeah, I find romance very puzzling because there's not much logic to it, so it completely throws me.
Do you think, though, that also because you're in Canada with your immediate family, but your home family are in the UK, do you think you felt more connected by writing the stories then?
I think it was as well, yeah. It was a need to have that familiar family around me, because when you're writing a book, you think about it a lot. You're in that world all the time. I was missing that family connection. And what happened actually with COVID was I went over to see Mum for 2 months and then COVID hit. I haven't been back in Canada for 2.5 years now. So I couldn't travel really for 2 years. But yeah, it's... So yeah, I had that real need, I think, to connect with family. And I think once you had more time on your hands, because I wasn't working and doing the day-to-day stuff, had time to sort of think about more of these emotional needs, I guess, is what it is. Because you're not into I've got to do this now, and I've got a meeting here and a meeting there. You don't have the same sort of structure to your day. So yeah, I think that was part of it as well.
Yeah. And are there other ways, do you think, that having written and published this book now, are there other ways that has affected you personally in your everyday life?
Oh, it's changed my life completely. Absolutely. I had no idea what I was doing. Okay, so you finish writing your book, and then you have to decide, okay, what's the cover of the book going to be? And then that's when it's this little thing in your head says, really, I'm going to have a cover to my book. And then you start going through like W.H. Smith's and places like that and thinking, oh, my book could be on the bookshelves. Yeah, so that changes your perspective of yourself, and people treat you differently. There's a little neighbourhood where Mum used to live, and people were coming up to me and saying, oh, I hear you've written a book. And I'm thinking, yeah, I know, I've done lots of other things. I was 30 years in healthcare, but no, you've written a book. It's like, oh, that's a big thing, you know. I've got my thesis, I've got my master's degree. Yeah, but you've written the book. So people are very excited about the fact they've met an author. And I think I'd only been in Canada about 3 days, and I was out getting some coffee or something. And, just chatting to people, the person you're asking for a coffee. And I said, oh, yeah, something came up. And I said, I've written a book. Oh, really? You've written a book? What is it? And can I buy a copy? And will you sign it? And it's like, really? You're joking? So that piece is really, really surprising. But people are very supportive, and they're very interested in what you've done. And a lot of people do want to read your story. And I thought when I'd written the stories down that if I had one family member reading it, I'd have been thrilled to death. I didn't really imagine that complete strangers would be paying money on Amazon to buy a copy of my book, and I'd get nice reviews from them as well. So that has been a huge change, and it changes how you see yourself because other people see you differently. So it fits in, as I think we mentioned earlier, about motivation and doing whatever you want to any time in your life. This really makes you realize that you can change your life, and it's full of surprises, and it's really exciting. It really is, because you never know what's around the corner. And I didn't expect any of this. I was just writing a few stories down.
Yay! Big up there, doing the thing you want to do whenever you want to do it.
Yeah, because it leads you into places you didn't realize, and you grow as a person. You change. And I'm not sure if I hadn't written the book, I think I would have been more the person I was when I just finished work. But since I've written the book, I've continued to grow and change and look for more challenges. And that's, even if you just write your story down for that reason, that is superb because you benefit as an individual so much. You're sitting there thinking, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. And maybe I should do something about my website. And yeah, so I mean, having a website, another big thing. I didn't think I'd ever have a website. I had to have a photo shoot for my photos. All these little things are so exciting.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. So, with all of those wonderful benefits and exciting things, would you recommend that other people who have an inkling to write a book, whether for publishing or for themselves, that they give it a go? And what advice might you give that person?
Okay, I think the biggest piece of advice I would give is don't think of yourself as writing a book. Just think of yourself as writing your stories down. Because if you think of yourself as a published author writing a book, you're going to start thinking yourself as Shakespeare, like, oh, it's got to be so good. And if it's not good enough, nobody's ever going to read it. Well, the reality is that you write your stories down. If you need help along the way, get it. After the story was set and it was, in book format, then you have an editor who will come to you and tell you if you need to make any massive changes. So the way the book system is set up is that there are so many checks and balances along the way. You don't have to worry about the published offering at the end, or is it going to be full of spelling mistakes, or are there going to be plot line issues that I've missed out on, like the plot doesn't make sense. No, because that's what editors do. So the only thing you have to do really is be creative and work on that piece. Don't listen to the voice in your head telling you that you can never write a book. You can write a book, and if you need help, go and get it, is my suggestion.
That is brilliant advice. Thank you. Yeah, don't let that stop your flow, because that could hold you back, couldn't it? If you were concerned about the end result, I think to begin with, you want to just get it out there and just write.
Yes, it's because the unique part about your book and your story is the story you're telling. It's not about the punctuation. It's not about how you put the pieces together. To a certain extent it is, but that's not what it's all about. The unique part about what you offer, your creative content, is really your story. And that you already know. So that's the easy part. So I could do other jobs to other people to deal with.
Yeah, quite right. Oh, it's been absolutely fabulous speaking with you today, Jill. How can people connect with you?
Well, I have a website, www.jmphillipsauthor.com. And the reason I couldn't go with Jill Phillips is that Jill Phillips is a Christian country singer. So I'm J.M. Phillips, as in Jill Margaret. So jmphillipsauthor.com. And on there's a link to my Facebook author page where I have some of my blogs as well. And there's some of my blogs are on my website as well. And also my website, you'll see some of the family photographs. So the characters or the family members that I mentioned in the book, I have photographs of those on there with a little blurb next to it to explain who they are and a little bit about their background. So it gives a little bit of context for the stories as well. And a photograph of Lamlash Street.
That's fabulous, Jill. Thanks again. It's been a really, really lovely chat.
Oh, you're more than welcome. It's been a pleasure for me as well.
Thanks so much for listening to Creativity Found. If your podcast app has the facility, please leave a rating and review to help other people find us. On Instagram and Facebook, follow @CreativityFoundPodcast, and on Pinterest, look for @CreativityFound. And finally, don't forget to check out creativityfound.co.uk, the website connecting adults who want to find a creative outlet with the artists and crafters who can help them tap into their creativity.